All right. We've reached 100 participants in the room, which is really wonderful to see, and I think that that's a good number to kick off at. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being with us here today. It's really so great to have so many of you here and to have our wonderful panelists available to speak with us for this event. I'll start off by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the true sovereigns and the custodians of the land that I'm calling in from. Feel free to use the chat function to acknowledge the custodians of the land that you are calling in from today. I recognise that wherever we are, that this land is stolen land and that sovereignty has not been ceded. I want to acknowledge particularly today the impact that British and European invasion has had on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls. It's a violence that continues today, but is matched by the strength and the resilience of Aboriginal women and community today. I'm looking at people like Djabwurrung Gunai Gudjimara woman Lydia Thorpe, who we're so privileged and lucky to have here with us today and who we'll hear from later on. On behalf of all of us here, I pay respects to First Nations people joining us and to elders past, present and emerging. Hello, I'm Gabrielle de Vietri. I'm a woman, a parent, a queer identifying person, an artist, an activist, a paralegal and just recently the Mayor of Yarra. Welcome to this Women in Leadership session. A couple of housekeeping points. We'll be recording this webinar today, so it will be available after the event for those who have RSVP'd. You'll see in your options at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box. You can submit questions here during the presentations or after the presentations, and you can also upvote other people's questions using the little thumb icon. You can direct your questions to a specific speaker or to all three speakers, and we'll try to answer as many as we can of these questions later in the session. There's also a chat box, which is different to the Q&A, where you can leave comments or chat with other participants during the session. I wanted to open this seminar by recognising how powerful it is to see yourself in leaders. Recognising yourself, whether it's your age, your gender, your economic or social or cultural background, your sexuality, your disability, parenthood, recognising yourself forges a pathway through your imagination. It puts you there. It makes you think, that could be me. I could do that. I never saw myself becoming a mayor. I never imagined myself a mayor. But I saw around us issues of social and environmental justice that were just too urgent to ignore. And I knew that I had to step up and work with other people to change things. And as that dawned upon me, I think I saw and unconsciously noted things around me and women around me. I saw passing by me Alison Clark, a former Greens mayor, on her bike, riding down Wellington Street. That image stuck with me. I saw Greta Thunberg, who swept the world off its feet with her fierce clarity and her unwavering determination. I noted that young women can be fierce. I saw Jacinda Ardern, getting teary talking about my own inspiration. It's a bit embarrassing. I saw Jacinda Ardern with a new baby and Samantha Ratnam with a new baby, leading a country with dazzling spirit. I saw my mum take on the role of campaign manager for the WA Greens only a few years after she first volunteered. I saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez take on rusted old political structures with intelligence and energy. And of course, I saw these three inspiring, powerful and committed women that we'll hear from today who have shown us close up what women in leadership can achieve together and forge path for others like me to rise into positions of leadership. Seeing these women in action turn things that I thought were barriers to leadership into opportunities to represent a different point of view, a fresh perspective, and to continue to fight for gender equality and the structural reforms that accompany it. And to bring a new level of understanding and respect for the planet and for the people that we represent. I'm so proud to be part of a party that elevates the voices of women, women of colour, First Nations women, so that in the future, these pathways can be well trodden making it easier and easier for women to assume that they have the right and the support to take the lead and to be treated with respect and paid properly. So that one day, hopefully, International Women's Day will just be a celebration of all that we have achieved and not a reminder of everything we still have to fight for. On that note, I'd like to acknowledge that many of us are probably feeling grief or anger on behalf of the women who have come forward to share their stories of assault from within political institutions. It's incredibly disheartening that in 2021, women are still being preyed upon, assaulted, discriminated against, and still have to fight to be heard and believed. I know we are all sick of it, and I want to thank you for being here and for being part of a movement for change and equality. We have an incredible list of panel of speakers today. Later, we'll hear from Samantha Ratnam, leader of the Victorian Greens, and Lydia Thorpe, Senator for Victoria, and I'll give you some more information about them shortly. But first up, we are going to hear from Ellen Sandell. Ellen is the Deputy Leader of the Victorian Greens and State MP for Melbourne. With a background in science, Ellen is a leading voice on climate action in the Victorian Parliament. Thanks for being here today, Ellen, and take it away.
Thanks, Gabrielle, and hi everyone. Hi Sam, hi Lydia, hi everyone following at home. Thank you for being here, and yeah, I also feel very inspired to be working with such amazing, fierce women. And I too want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country today. I thought quite hard about what I wanted to say to you all today, and this week I just felt that the overwhelming emotion that I had in me was rage. And I really just felt so angry watching the media this week. And I saw a GIF online, and this summed up how I felt. I'm just going to share my screen quickly with you to show you. Can you see that? You know, the Beyonce image, for people who can't see at home, in the hold up video where she's just walking through the streets smashing cars with a baseball bat and setting stuff on fire. That's how I felt this week. And I started to ask myself why did the media coverage of the Culture and Parliament House and Christian Porter, why did it affect me so much? And I talked to my girlfriends about it, and we realised that just living every day in a world where the systems are set up so that men feel entitled to be in positions of power, and in fact they feel so entitled that they can still behave terribly, still treat women terribly, and still feel entitled to attain those positions of power, and that their reputations and their right to have good careers is actually valued more than women's lives. And just living in that kind of world and that kind of culture, let alone fighting against it, it's just exhausting. And I think that's why I felt so much rage, that living in that world where men are held to such a different standard to women, and where it's hard for women to even be believed when we talk about abuse or harassment. It is an exhausting place to be. So I just wanted to acknowledge that so many women across Australia are feeling just really exhausted right now. And it had me reflecting on my own experience as a woman in public life. And I know that I am incredibly lucky in the scheme of things. I am white, straight, I don't live with a disability. I had access to an education, and I also grew up, some of my formative career experiences were at the Australian Youth Climate Coalition with a group of incredible women who were leading that organisation. And so I feel like I was really fostered and lifted up by so many women throughout my career. And so I felt incredibly lucky. But even with all of this privilege, I'm still not immune to the effects of sexism and misogyny in our society. And talking to my girlfriends this week, we talked about the fact that every single one of us has an experience of abuse or harassment. And actually, we're only just realising now, even deep into our 30s, how that's affected us over our lives, how living in that culture and the experiences we had as young women affect us to this day. And I think a lot of women are realising that, looking back over the experiences they've had in their lives and realising, oh, actually, that was abuse, that was harassment. And the culture told us that it wasn't at the time. I think that's why so many Australian women are feeling pretty terrible right now. And being a woman in public life, it is an incredible privilege. And I try and remember that every day, because it is also quite hard. And there are experiences that we have had, all of us here on this call, where it was difficult to be a woman in public life. I remember even just one of the first experiences I had when I was a Greens candidate. I was doing when I was first announced as a Greens candidate, I was emceeing a forum, a climate change forum, where Adam Bandt was the main speaker. And a man, quite a powerful man in the Greens, who was helping us with our campaign, was there watching, helping us to run this event. And I was quite nervous, but I thought I'd done a really good job emceeing this event and talking about climate change and giving my speech. And as soon as I walked off the stage, I remember saying to him, oh, how do you think it went? And he went, we need to talk about what you're wearing. And I just thought, oh my goodness, just really? And that it got me so down to think that what a woman wears is so much more important than what she says. And obviously, when I entered Parliament, I spoke out about some of the sexist culture that exists in the Victorian Parliament, particularly when I started out, the Labor Party in government they found the two of the oldest men with the boomiest voices to come in and yell every time I gave a speech. So every time I would stand on my feet, they would just yell. And it wouldn't even be, they didn't even have anything to yell. It was just, they would just yell the same word over and over because they had nothing to say. They just yell, blah, 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 over the top of me, just so I couldn't be heard, just so I'd be intimidated. And when I spoke out about that, even some journalists said, oh, we don't think that's sexist. We think it's just because you're a Green. And I thought, I have a male colleague who's the same age as me, who was elected at the same time as me, who gives very similar speeches to me, sitting next to me, and they don't do it to him. Why is that? And most people in Parliament didn't even think it was a problem. They thought that's just the culture. That's just the way things go. And that was, to me, almost more concerning than the fact that it was happening. So I think as a young woman in Parliament, we also obviously have some unique challenges in terms of being primary caregivers, because still mostly it's women who are primary caregivers. And I'm very fortunate that I have a partner who's I've had 2 kids since I was been in Parliament, and I had a partner who stays home to look after those kids. But I was still the first woman to breastfeed in Victorian Parliament and not get kicked out. And I think that says something about how family friendly these places are, and Sam might talk a bit about that as well. And when I had my first child, there was no provision for maternity leave in the Parliament. The presiding officers came to me and said, oh, well, what are you going to do? You're going to have a baby, what are you going to do? And I thought, well, what do women do when they have babies? Oh, well, women don't really have babies in the Parliament. Men have babies and they come back the next day. And women, well, no one's really quite sure. So I had to just make it up. I just had to pick, okay, I'm going to take 3 months off. And everyone kind of went, oh, okay, all right, I guess you can just make it up. There was no provision. So much so that when I was on maternity leave with my daughter, they built a whole new office building in Parliament, and they weren't even going to put a breastfeeding room in until I came back from maternity leave, and one of the Labor women actually said to me, did you know they're not even putting a breastfeeding room in? And we had to campaign to get them to turn what was the server room that had brooms and servers in it to a breastfeeding room because they weren't even going to put one in. And at the time, some of the senior people in Parliament said to me, oh, but we couldn't give you something that would look like you were getting special treatment more so than the rest of the population. I thought that says a lot about our culture. But things are actually changing, and I still think that we are facing a bit of an uphill battle, particularly as women when we're told to lean in, to speak up. But when we do lean in and speak up, we're told we're too opinionated, that we're too kind of in your face, that we should let other people have a go, that we're too loud. Don't try and steal the limelight too much. It's ugly for a woman to do that. And I think that that's the kind of culture that is shifting now, with incredible, powerful women standing up and taking their rightful place and saying, no, I will have a voice, I will share my opinion. And, you know, often those women have better opinions, not always, but I think, you know, I think we show that women's voices speaking up is so powerful, because it exposes that many of the people who have been in positions of power perhaps not as, you know, a little bit more mediocre than we would like. So COVID has shone a light on some of the cracks in society as well, particularly around how much women carry the burden of lifting up our society. And my hope is, though, now with COVID and also with this reckoning in Canberra, that it's gone so far that we're never going to go back now. And the genie's out of the bottle. Things are only going to get better. And as we elect more diverse voices, we realise that the culture of squashing women's voices and squashing diversity, it actually hurts us all. And so lifting women up and electing more diverse people to our parliaments will help us all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It's really brings us together to hear of your experiences, and thank you for articulating and challenging that rage that many of us feel, you know, on our behalf. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. Ellen unfortunately has to leave us at about 10 to 2 for another commitment, but there will be some time to ask questions before she leaves. So don't forget to put in your questions through the Q&A function. And now we'll hear from Samantha Ratnam. After 15 years of working as a social worker, Samantha entered Victorian politics. She is currently the leader of the Victorian Greens and MLC for the Northern Metropolitan Region. Welcome, Samantha, and take it away.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to be joining you here today. I acknowledge that I'm joining you from Wurundjeri land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. What a time to be talking about women in leadership. And like Ellen, I sit in the state parliament with Ellen. And while it's not federal parliament, it's hard not to be affected by what's been happening there. Similarly, I felt a mixture of anger and rage, and also really deep heartache this week. That's heartache for the women at the centre whose lives are being torn apart by men's violence and men's behaviour, and anger that we're not being heard, that they're not being heard, they're not being listened to, and they're getting the same old responses. And the reason we feel this so much, I think, is because it just keeps happening and the impact is cumulative. And that's been one of my kind of take-home reflections after this week, that people don't understand that this is layer upon layer, decade after decade, and that's why it hurts so much. And until that is recognised, I don't think we're going to get the change that we need. So as we head into International Women's Day for 2021, in the midst of this turmoil, it's such a stark reminder in the context that we're in that there's just so much work to do. That being said, I think it's really unfair that women both have to endure this type of mistreatment and discrimination and to be the ones to fix it, to help people understand what's actually happening. And that seems to be exactly what's happening again right now at the federal stage. That being said, I wouldn't be here if not for the pioneers of women from the feminist movement. They have carried the burden and done such incredible work for someone like me to be sitting, talking to you in the position that I am. They've endured abuse, exclusion, and discrimination, marched on the streets, campaigned with their life's work and created solutions, and have never stopped fighting for change. So I stand on their shoulders and acknowledge those women who've come before me, for whom I would not be here before you today. We've gained so much, but we know that there's so much left to do. I've been really lucky in my life that I've actually been, a lot of my working life has been in female-dominated environments. I got a bit spoiled by that. And it was a stark shock when I started to move outside those environments. I trained as a social worker. I worked in really collaborative community sector organizations. And more often than not, I had female managers, I had female CEOs, and they were incredible pioneers that meant that I felt like I was given every opportunity to shine and to flourish. But the moment I entered other spaces that were not female dominated and more often male dominated, especially as I entered politics, and the moment that I demonstrated some leadership or wanted to demonstrate some leadership, I sure felt that resistance coming my way. I have to say that I think in my experience, where we're at in 2021, some of the big overt barriers have really been chipped away at. There's still lots and lots of overt barriers to go, but some of the really big overt barriers have been chipped away at and have been reduced. But there are so many invisible barriers that still exist. And sometimes you don't know they're there until you come crashing into them and go, whoa, why can't I move forward? It's like hitting your head against a glass pane. So I wanted to talk about that, acknowledging that there are still many explicit barriers that remain to be addressed. I wanted to talk about some of those implicit, invisible barriers in the hope that we can facilitate a discussion and look forward to talking to you more about how do we recognize those, because people will deny that they're there and they will deny your experience, but they are there, they are discriminating women, and it's important that we recognize what they are, name them so that we can actually crack through them. So a few examples that I thought about when I thought about what those invisible barriers are, and I come across them kind of on a daily level. First example that came to my mind was when I was actually a young social worker, just kind of graduating uni. I was a volunteer on the Collingwood Soup Band, something I did in my spare time and absolutely loved that work. It was run by volunteers. We all chipped in where we could, and I soon found myself the president of the organising committee at the age of 24. That role required me to troubleshoot a whole range of things, from like logistics of securing food to managing the human relationships amongst the volunteers. There was this one instance I remember not long into that role when a female volunteer came to me and said, look, I'm having trouble with an older male volunteer on the night that I volunteer. He's just being too forceful and authoritative. It kind of feels like bullying, and I think it needs to be addressed, but I don't know what to do about it. So we talked about what to do about it, and there were a range of things that we were going to put in place. But one of those actions was that I was going to talk to this older male volunteer just to talk about his behaviour and how it was impacting this young female volunteer who didn't feel like she could confront him. The power dynamic was just too intense. I started having this conversation with this older male volunteer, and rather than sit and listen and acknowledge that there could have been something in this interaction that had led this woman to complain, he turned it straight away on me. He said I was mishandling it. He belittled and undermined my position and said I was misconstruing it. I was doing the wrong thing. And he'd been a volunteer for more than 20 years. I was a new volunteer, a young woman in this role, and basically made me feel like that I'd done completely the wrong thing. And with his experience and force, he really made me feel like that I wasn't fit to hold that position. And not only did he do that to me, he then went and talked to all the other volunteers and said, she's really not doing a very good job. Look at what she's done with this example. You know, at that time I was 24, I didn't have a lot to kind of fall back on and who to talk to about this. And a part of me started to doubt myself in that position too. It took me years to realize what had happened, that I'd actually done the right thing. And I knew that I'd done the right thing because the behavior stopped. So while he denied it and resisted it, the behavior did stop and things did get better. But I realized what he'd done, which was to totally undermine the legitimacy I had in a leadership position. So the moment I acted in a space that he thought I shouldn't act, he was willing to come down like a ton of bricks on me and engage and organize other people to join that campaign. The second example that I have in this kind of invisible barriers is something they just bump into was I got elected to local council in 2012. I was in my sort of mid-30s by then. It's not that young, but in that context, quite young, because actually the CEO had been there for many, many years. It was a male-dominated environment, particularly in the leadership team. And the CEO had some pretty outdated ways of relating to people. I found that complex discussions were dumbed down when women were in the room and female councillors were in the room. Important details were suddenly left out. And I had to work doubly hard to be taken seriously and to be given permission to enter those spaces to talk about those really complex problems and put solutions onto the table. I remember hearing about a practice that he had, which was that he would take some councillors into his office before a council meeting to thrash out a solution prior to the council meeting, but exclude a whole range of people, often the women. So there was this internal kind of group that were making decisions before the council meeting, but certain people were excluded. And they were the people that were not given the permission to demonstrate leadership, and often they were the women. I started to learn that there were these rules about who was allowed to speak about what and when. And the moment that you challenged that, you were sidelined or you were dismissed. The third example, and there's many more, but I'll keep it short for the sake of this, the time today, was entering the state parliament, which I did about 3 or 4 years, sort of 3 years ago. It certainly is a strange place, as you're all learning, seeing what's happening at the federal stage. But it wasn't long before I was called a pig by one of my Liberal female counterparts, actually. And that was when I called out a Liberal senator who basically said that women have to earn their place. Women from minority backgrounds just have to work a little bit harder if they want to attain power, positions of power and leadership. So I challenged that, and the moment that I did, I was howled down like I've never been howled at before. It made quite the news headlines that night. There were heckles from my predecessor, the former leader, to come back. And it was interesting that just a roar that just every day just kept getting louder and louder. And at that stage, I didn't know how to understand what was happening. And it took me a while to unpack it when I talked to colleagues and talked to people about it. And it dawned on me that what they were saying through those comments was, we don't know what we're dealing with. Immigrant, brown woman in a position of leadership, we don't know how to deal with you. We know how to converse with what we think is a stereotypical person in a leadership position, which was essentially a white man, but we don't know how to relate to you. So we want the old familiar person back. And that was kind of underscoring that again. Just yesterday, I read a motion into the parliament to introduce family-friendly work hours. Ellen's talked to you about just how backward we are in the state parliament. We don't have family-friendly work hours. It excludes women and people with caring responsibilities. It's not good for our health and well-being. And the moment I started reading that motion out, the howls and the heckles just got louder and louder. As we're nearing International Women's Day, people didn't have the self-awareness to even just quieten down their internal prejudice. It was quite incredible and really deeply troubling. I've learned that what this all amounts to is that sometimes it can be very subtle, the exclusion and discrimination. Sorry, time. It's constantly changing shape, and we've got to think about how we're recognizing and seeing it. We've got to recognize it to challenge it. And I'll conclude with this one quote that keeps coming back to me this week with everything that we're experiencing, a Khalil Gibran quote, which is, our pain is a breaking of the shell that encloses our understanding. And I'm hoping that this pain is not for naught, that we're all experiencing, that what it does herald is more understanding. Apologies for going over time, Gabrielle, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for that inspiring speech, and I think some of those experiences that you shared are absolutely extraordinary and troubling. But I'm sure that many of us can see ourselves in situations where we've been undermined by somebody, racked with self-doubt at the time, but can see very clearly in hindsight how right we've been. And I hope that will be the experience, or no, I hope that kind of experience doesn't work, but I think that it is so clarifying to see that with hindsight, that we had taken the right path and made the right decision. And I commend you for the family-friendly hours in Parliament. I think it seems like such an obvious thing, but gosh, it is a huge perception shift that needs to happen. So thank you. I'll now introduce Lydia Thorpe. Lydia is a proud Jabberong Gunai Gujimara woman, a lifelong activist and community leader. In 2017, she became the first Aboriginal woman elected to Victorian Parliament, and now she holds federal politicians to account as the first Aboriginal senator for Victoria. Welcome, Lydia, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And thank you, Alan and Sam. It's good to be back in the team, the old team of women supporting women, right? Our party room was the safest place in that building because it was full of women and full of lived experiences and a sisterhood, which I think is really important. And I just want to acknowledge that not only are we on stolen land, we are amongst traditional owners who are experiencing extreme violence, oppression, transgenerational trauma, and it's relentless. And so I just want to acknowledge all the strong matriarchs out there who've died fighting for my privilege to be here and in this position today. I want to acknowledge, you know, all the elders who've been affected, particularly by COVID, Black and white elders out there. And it's a difficult time, and I can come up with all examples, but I think that I could actually spend a week telling you examples of my personal journey with violence and sexual assault and other forms of men's violence. But I'm actually sick of talking about it now. I'm tired of it. And as long as we acknowledge that the pain is not something we've inflicted upon ourselves, it's been inflicted upon these male perpetrators, and the need for women to come together and just hold each other up, you know, in times like this. You know, what we're dealing with in Parliament right now is horrible. It's not only around sexism and rape allegations, it's also about racism. And it's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And in the short time I've been in that place, I can tell you now it's one of the most toxic places I've ever worked in my life. But in saying that, I'm not going to let that beat me, and I'm not going to lay down and allow them to get away with this kind of behaviour, because, you know, this is about the security guard, the women security guards in that building. This is about the women that work in the cafeteria. It's about the cleaners that most of these politicians just walk past and snub, don't take the time to say hello, how you going, what's your name, you know, and thank you for the work that you do. They just don't get it. And it's more the reason, I mean, if anything, it's made me more determined to raise more women up, black, white. Like, we just need to get as many women in positions of power and decision making as we possibly can at every level of government, and in our communities. And I think one thing that we don't do very well as women is self-care. Women in leadership positions particularly tell everyone else how to self-care, and we're always looking after somebody else. And I think, you know, we leave ourselves to last, and that's how our women burn out, when they're not supported by other women. And, you know, sometimes it's just a phone call, sometimes it's just a walk in the park, sometimes it's a coffee. But those personal relationships and personal connections are so important. And one thing I did do last week in Parliament was I just did an open invite to all our Greens staff and parliamentarians to just come down and sit on the grass outside Parliament, just to remove ourselves from the toxic culture. And I don't know whether they're expecting me to do a corroboree dance or what they're expecting, but there was a few nervous people, I can tell you. And we had the best laugh. We sat in a circle and we told stories, and we had belly laughs, and everyone walked away and went, oh, okay, yep, let's get back in that building, you know, let's go and rip these people apart. Like, we were ready to go as soon as we just connected, not as staff or politicians, but as people. That's the human nature that I think we often, or too often, forget about, and it's something that keeps me going. That's why I talk too much and talk a lot and talk to random people on the street, especially if they're really young or really old, because that's what that's how my culture has taught me to survive through this oppressive regime that we're under, and to always check in with our old people, which I think a lot of mainstream Australians don't do. They don't check on their elders and see how they're going. And that's a really important part of the journey. You've got to check in and ensure that you're doing the right thing in your leadership journey, and that you have the support and guidance from your old people. So I just wanted to talk more about the healing part of, what we should be doing as, and I hate the word leaders, I'm not a leader. I'm just the oldest of 90 cousins, and I had no choice but to be bossy and to, tell them off when they needed to be told off. But as far as leadership is concerned, we all have a responsibility to protect country and protect one another. And we don't have to have the label of leader attached to that. We can just do it. So healing on country is really important. I'm heading off on Sunday to Gunditjmara country because I am feeling a little burnt out. I'm feeling tired. There's been a lot of disclosures from community as part of this process. There's been a lot of community, particularly elders, reaching out asking if I'm okay. So that's been, that's all part of the healing and part of the journey. And I just think as Greens, we should also be, and people listening, it's think about your own personal healing journey as part of this, and not get sucked into the horrible media that you're continually watching, and the Twitter and the Facebook and all of those triggers that are triggering so many women in this country right now. We have to, that's what they want. They want us triggered and, off our game. So that's a reminder that we have to strengthen our hearts, souls, our families and our children, so that we can get back up and sort these people out. Because the more we do that as women, the more women are going to rise up, and the more women are going to beat them at the next election for their seat and join us in that parliament to make this country what it should be. And I'll end it there.
If we were in a room, I'm sure we'd be hearing raucous applause. So, but for all three of you, thank you so much, Lydia. Thank you for those reflections on elevating other women, elevating each other, on self-care, on spending time on the grass. A very good lesson for us all. And I can see how much everything that everyone has said today resonates with the people who are listening in through the comments that are coming in through the chat. I love that each of you have balanced attention to naming the behaviours that we need to change, but then also setting us up for healing and setting us up to become stronger and elevating other women to become stronger as well, as individuals and collectively. I'm going to check in at the Q&A now, and thank you for everyone for putting your questions in. I'll start with one from an anonymous person that's had a few elevations. So thank you for this event. I would like to know what you think we should do with our rage. I feel these problems are so entrenched, I can't see a way to change them or do my bit personally. And I think I'd probably like to start with Ellen to talk about some of the tools that you use when you feel that rage.
I think Lydia summed it up really well, everything she talked about, to find your way of healing. And for me, I mean, it's talking to my girlfriends about it, and kind of on Tuesday night, we just all got on a little phone call and just had like a collective, like, this sucks. We all feel terrible. And then, okay, good, now let's get back to it. But it's whatever is healing for you, you've got to identify that for yourself and do it. And I like what Lydia said about, that's what people want, is for us to be off our game. And so we almost have a responsibility to not let it get to us, but at the same time, you've got to acknowledge when it does get to you and find a way through that. I find it quite difficult when people ask me this kind of question. People often say, oh, it's so hard to be a woman in politics. Like, why would anyone do it? And my answer genuinely is like, you just have to do it. And the more women who do it, the easier it'll be for the next one and the next one and the next one. And it's hard and that sucks, but you still have to do it.
Yeah. Sam?
Absolutely concur with both Lydia and Ellen's words of advice. Really important to be able to express it, join with others. You'll often find that you're not alone in feeling that, and it does feel better when you can share that with others. The other thing I like to do is start to organize in my head how we're going to win this thing. So overcome that barrier or that discrimination. So whatever is happening, you know, I always really believe in justice. Like, there's justice at the end. Sometimes it's really hard fought and it takes a long time and it takes a lot of work, but you get there in the end. So I'll often go into a place to think, okay, what's the next step in how we address this problem? Start joining with others, put some plans together and turn that rage into action. And then the more you do, the more the momentum builds, and you realize there's others who want to join with you too.
Yeah, absolutely. Lydia, did you have, you've touched on this a lot, but did you want to add anything to that question? Can you turn the rage into something productive?
I go on country, and I had a couple of women ring me last week about how they were feeling really down, and they told me about some animals that they saw. One was a sea eagle, and one was an echidna. And I said, don't just see them as an animal. Watch how they dance, watch how they communicate, watch what they say and what they sing, and really get in touch with, you know, what that being is about. Because that's where our dances come from, that's where our songlines, our stories, and our responsibility for every animal, every living being on this earth. And it's just an amazing healing moment, and such a spiritual connection that you have when you're sitting alone or you're sitting with your family and you see this bird come from nowhere. You know, it's really important to just have a moment to reflect on what that communication is with that bird or that animal, because I think Sam and Alan have covered the other elements. It's all of the above, but we have to self-care. I've seen too many Black women burn out in this struggle, and I don't want to be another number that burns out. So getting in touch with ourselves and the country that we're on is really important as part of the journey, and it's part of instilling that resilience in us to be able to turn it into a strategy and fight the patriarchy, smash the patriarchy.
I'm going to direct this next question to whoever wants to answer it out of the panel. So it comes from someone who works in STEM, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And they say that they're concerned every day about the push to get more girls and women into a field where the culture is so unfriendly to women. And they feel that the same situation is in politics. How can we ask more women to get more involved without doing the work to improve the culture first? So a good conundrum that you're putting to us. Sam, Ellen, Lydia?
Oh, I'm happy
I reckon
to say
Ellen comes from that field. I'm happy. Yeah, go for it, Ellen.
Yeah, so I was in, I studied to be a scientist. I worked in science before I went into politics, and I've done a lot of work with women in science, talking about how to make it more friendly to women. And there are a lot of barriers that exist in science that don't exist in other workplaces around. It's like very difficult to take time off. Your whole career gets put backwards, you know, amongst other things. Firstly, I just want to say although we've expressed a lot of rage and a lot of anger about the way things are changing, and there's a lot of good in these fields. And so in science, like I work with some incredible women in science who are really lifting each other up, and there are so many little pockets where women are getting together to change science and technology fields. So I wouldn't want to put women off that. I think that there are really safe places within those fields for them, and people advocating to make it safer. And it's the same in politics. There are little groups of women all over the place who are changing it, who are lifting each other up, and that gives me hope. And if a woman enters politics or STEM now, it is very different to 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So each year it does get easier, but it won't. We actually need women in there, as I said before, even though it can be hard. I feel bad often saying to women, oh, it's so difficult, we have to do it anyway. But I don't see any other way. If women don't go into it, it doesn't change.
Probably a good time to acknowledge the steps that each one of those women who came before us has taken, whether they're somebody that has their name in a, in a book or in a story or in a headline, or whether it's just someone who toughed it out and who made small changes along the way. I think that we have a lot of respect and thanks to pay to them. Did either of you want to add something to that, Lydia?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Our men have a role to play here. It can't be up to us. And there is a lot of good men out there. So I think the more that men stand up to their mates, who their mates will relate to more than they relate to us, the more, we're breaking down that patriarchy when they're speaking their own language. So we need to not demonize men too much either. And I'm not the best feminist you'll come across, but I think in blackfellow society and in our world, men are very important, and they play a very significant role in our society to maintain that holistic approach. And it was always equal between men and women in our society, and children even. So in our world, our men are demonized, they're locked up, they're treated like criminals, and we need them. It's about breaking down our society. What the government and what the colonizers have tried to do for hundreds of years is to break down our society as families and as clans, nations, tribes. And one good way to do that, obviously, is to take our children away, but then it's also about demonizing our men. And then the women are left holding the bag and fighting the rest of the fight. So we need everybody to stand up the way we stand up for refugees and Black Lives Matter and, the forest, logging, climate. It needs to be a movement that they can't ignore. And we can march for climate, we can march for all those other things, but unless we're supporting our women out there when we need it, like now, we need the big codes to come out and call it out. We need this whole country to come out and call out what's going on. So yeah, we need them. But then we don't need them. We know that we can get along in this world quite well without them. But they also need to be held account. My son's 30 this year, and he calls it out. So I've raised a good man, and we just can't demonize them all. And I've got a grandson on the way.
Congratulations. Always good news. That's very exciting, and I'm sure that you'll raise a good grandson as well. I have a question.
I apologise. I have to go. I'm going to give a speech at one of our local primary schools, which is a fun part of my job, one that's just opened this year. So I'm sorry that I can't stay with you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ellen, and wonderful to hear from you. I'll direct a question to both Lydia and Sam then from someone who asks, what is your advice for fellow young women of colour who might be aspiring to for a career in politics and leadership? So specifically for other young women of colour who are looking to follow your lead. Sam?
Lydia, happy for me to go first. So my first bit of advice would be to seek other women out, potentially to be mentors or supports throughout that journey. I've always found it really valuable having people who've trodden that pathway before to act as a confidant or to bounce ideas around, and they've been really valuable conversations. My second bit of advice would be to go for it. Often you don't see yourselves represented in those positions, and they can be pretty intimidating, but gee, the ground just changes, like it transforms the moment you enter that space. I was reflecting on when the previous question was asked as well about the importance of women being there and women from diverse backgrounds being in these spaces where we've traditionally been excluded from. Just a kind of anecdote from the Parliament, about a year or two ago, I was in the chamber and suddenly like just the noise level just was getting higher and higher. And I was like, what's going on? I mean, you can get raucous in there, but it was just getting a bit like, it's like a locker room. And then I turned around and looked around and I realized that I was the only woman in the chamber. So suddenly just by happenstance, when women had left, the clerks who were the women had also left. And it just suddenly become, I was the last one there accidentally. And something had kind of almost unconsciously happened when it became a male-dominated space versus an equal participation space. Since then, we've had an election. Our house now is nearly 50-50 men and women, which is really great. And I tell you, the tone has really changed in that chamber. So women being there, women from diverse backgrounds being there, fundamentally transforms those spaces. So you might be thinking, oh, I've got to go into those spaces and it's going to be like that. But I tell you, the moment you enter that space, you change that space for the better. So seek out mentors and supports who can guide you through that process and go for it.
Thanks, Sam. Lydia.
So I had to let my dog in. She's crying at the door and she just licked me on the chin. She's just been spaded 2 days ago, so she's very sooky. And yeah, sorry. Women coming into this space, women of colour, daughter's now calling me. It's all happening. Do it.
You got your hands full.
Like Sam said, do it. And it's incredible to make a bunch of old white men feel so uncomfortable. It's the best feeling you'll ever feel. When I first started to do that, I used to be really nervous and I'd get all the comments like, you're not just here for Aboriginals, commenting on my outfits and all of that kind of stuff and sleazing around. But to walk in, I just put this thought in my head, or these words in my head when I walk into a room like that. You own this. You walk in that room, you own it. You know much more than these old white fellas. So you walk in loud, proud, head up, and just do it. And sometimes I'll be shitting myself and I'll still be doing it that way. But it just by being present in a very white space, in a very male-dominated space, they are freaking out more than we are. So it puts them on notice. I'm on a committee at the moment, an inquiry, all men. I'm the only woman, let alone only Black woman. And they're just all old white men, stale, pale, and they have no idea. So, I walk in there, I demand my coffee, I put on it's the only time I use my senator, power, is amongst them old white fellas. It's not people on the ground, it's not anyone else, it's just those people, because that's the power of a woman when we're supported by other women. And it's, yes, it's not easy all the time, but I tell you what, it's fun when you get those moments. And then you debrief, like Alan said, you ring up the girlfriends and you're having a laugh about such and such senator and how he's freaked out when you said this and that, and the looks on their faces, and you debrief with your mates. But you've got Sam, you've got myself, you've got Alan, you've got so many deadly women in our party that we are here to mentor you two and help you all. Sam was my leader in the Victorian Parliament. Alan was a mentor very early in my days. I had no idea how to, you know, do my job in that Parliament. So if it wasn't for people like Sam and Alan and the other female MPs we had, you know, I wouldn't have been able to do half the things I did. So it is about surrounding yourself with good, strong women and being available to others that are seeking your advice too. It's got to be, you know, a holistic thing. It's not just taking, it's about giving as well.
Thanks. You paint a really excellent picture of walking into the room and causing disruption just by being present. So that's a really powerful image. We're closing up to 2 o'clock now. So I guess I just want to wrap up by acknowledging the strong and influential women who have gone before us. Those also who the weaknesses as well, those women who have just been present, who you know, who may have felt that they weren't forging forward as fast as they can, but just by being present, they changed, they shifted some ground. I want to acknowledge those women who just stood their ground, the women who have called out discrimination, who've spoken out, the women who've made old white men uncomfortable, and the men who have been good allies to women. Lydia, Sam, and Ellen, you are those women who are forging the path for women in the future and for women today. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us all today, for telling your stories, for being open and sharing your experiences and your advice. You don't know how important it is for everyone to hear it and how much it empowers us all to hear these stories. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
And thank
to
you everyone.
too.
Thank you for joining us today, and I wish you a very happy International Women's Day. I mean, it's Women's Day every day, isn't it? Let's own the room like it's International Women's Day every day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank
See
you.
ya. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.